During our storytelling investigation, we've been talking all about stories. We've been listening to stories, telling stories, and writing stories. Some of the different types of stories we've talked about are fairy tales, short stories, epics. We've even talked about the same fairy tale in different cultures, and how it's the same and how it's different. Some of the ways that we've been told stories are through music, we've read some, we've been orally told some, we've written some, we've watched plays and puppets and mimes, we've done role-playing, we've listened to music, we've sang songs, and we've seen visual stories. We've also talked about some of the most important parts of a story, what we have to have in order for the story to be complete. We have to have the beginning, the middle, the end, characters, setting, problem, and a solution. Now we're going to talk about art and how art and paintings can also tell us stories. Every day in class, we write our journal entries. And besides writing, we always have to draw a picture. And usually that picture shows one part of the story, just like when we read a book. Here's the ugly duckling, and this page shows only one part of the story. Now sometimes there are students who like to divide their drawing area when they do their journal entries. Here is an example of a student who has divided his drawing area into two parts so that he can show two parts of the story. Did you know that professional artists sometimes do this as well? Let's take a look at a professional artist and his painting. Who do you think is the most important person in this picture? If you said it's the person who is shown the largest, you're correct. His name is Sir Henry Unton, and this painting shows his whole life story, not just one little part, but the entire thing. The little pieces of his life are shown in smaller pictures within this bigger one. Now let's look at some of the smaller pictures. Here he is at school. And we know that the school is Oxford because it says so right there. Well, Oxford is a university in England. And he's even doing something that we do in school. Can you tell what it is? He's reading a book. Maybe he's reading about stories as well. Let's look at another part of his life. Here is Sir Henry as a baby, being held by his mother. Now let's go back to the entire picture, since we've looked at a few of the smaller scenes. How many smaller pictures do you see within this bigger picture? So we have one here, his birth. Here's another one, and another, and here, and he's all over the place. Well, he should be. This is the story of Sir Henry's life. There's a lot more smaller pictures than we first thought, isn't there? When we have more than one part of a story in the same picture, we call this continuous narrative. It means we keep continuing the story. Let's look at another painting, which also tells a story. Do you recognize anyone in this picture? George Washington was the first president of the United States. He's in this picture. Let's look at where we usually see him on a $1 bill. The artist is showing someone we know, but in a different way than we're used to seeing him. In this painting, the artist has shown George Washington with the body of a child. The artist is trying to represent George Washington as a child. But if they showed just a regular child, we wouldn't know who it was. So he used the head of an older George Washington with the body of a child. Let's look at the head of George Washington in this painting next to a $1 bill. See? They're almost the same. This painting is of a famous story about George Washington and a cherry tree. We've heard about this in our school investigation. It was called a fable. And we learned that George Washington had cut down the cherry tree, and when his father asked him, George had said, "I cannot tell a lie. I did it. I cut down the tree." If this painting is about George Washington, then who is the man in the very front pulling back the curtain? Well, in this case, he is very important, even though the story is about George Washington. His name is Parson Weems, and he was the one who wrote down the story about George Washington and the cherry tree. Almost 100 years after Parson Weems wrote the story, it was discovered that George Washington never cut down the cherry tree. So how did we get this story? Well, George Washington was Parson's hero, and Parson had made up the story to glorify his hero. So Parson Weems was, in fact, the one who had told the lie. So this artist is showing the story that Parson Weems made up by having Parson pull back the curtain and point to his story. One aspect of telling stories through art that sometimes artists use a single shape over and over again in the picture to tie it all together. What shape do you see used in this picture? Is it squares? How about triangles? What about circles? Great! Where are the circles used? Let's look. Well, there's the cherries on the tree. Oh, there's the tree itself, and where the tree is planted. There's the buttons on the red coat, and the buttons on Parson Weems' coat. There's the cherries on the curtain, and the other cherry tree, and then the trees in the very far background. There's circles all over this painting. Now we're going to do an activity. If you have any questions, please raise your hand. And then after questions, your teacher will dismiss you back to your tables, and we'll begin on making our own art that tells a story.